My name is Sarah, and I'm 23 years old. I used to have a fairly normal life, or at least I thought I did growing up close to my parents, and things were okay, not perfect, but far from normal. I know it will sound crazy, but I've been thinking about this story for months. It's about family betrayal and the crazy things that can happen when someone thinks they're entitled to everything. Dysfunctional, my parents were hardworking, and we lived in a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. My older brother, Mark, had always been the golden child. He was the type of child who was the best at everything, was the best athlete in his class, and had a magnetic charm that made everyone love him. I never really had that. I was just average. It wasn't like we were ever enemies or anything. Mark was always the one receiving the attention and praise, which I suppose is how I became the invisible member of the family. However, when Mom passed away, everything changed. It was difficult for all of us, and the dad was obviously devastated. Because he didn't know how to handle losing his wife, and his health quickly began to deteriorate. He went from being a strong, proud man to a shadow of himself. Mark called me 2 months after Dad's funeral. We hadn't spoken much since the funerals, so I assume we were both still in shock when I answered, but even with both of them gone, the one thing I thought would remain constant was our home, which was all we had left and the only place I felt safe. That's when things started to change. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed it was about handling their affairs or closing up some things, but when I got there, I noticed right away how different the place felt. Mark was already sitting at the kitchen table, papers strewn all over him, and he had a serious expression on his face. "I need you to come over to the house, Sarah," he said, formally, like he was some stranger. He said, "I've been going over everything, and I've decided what needs to be done with the house," without even looking up from the papers I had completed. "What's going on, Mark?" he said, pushing the papers toward me. "This is about the house and the estate, Mom and Dad's will." I froze, not even considering the will yet. "Look," he said, not looking up. "What do you do?" I asked, my heart racing. "You mean that?" Mark finally sighed and looked up at me, saying, "The house is going to be mine. I'll take care of all the big stuff, and you'll get the smaller things, the heirlooms, a few family keepsakes, nothing else." I blinked, not believing what I was hearing. "You can't be serious. This house is ours. It belongs to both of us." "No, Sarah," he said in a more patronizing tone. "Now it belongs to me." Mark's face hardened, "But I'm doing what's right. I'm the one with the responsibilities, and you've never really been involved." I sat there in shock, the weight of his words sinking in. "Are you going to do this after everything? After Mom and Dad are gone, you're just going to take everything?" In the end, Mark didn't even flinch. "Yes, I'll give you a few months to sort out your life, but you don't have a place here anymore. You're not built for this, Sarah. You've never been the one to handle things. You should be thankful that I'm letting you stay here for as long as I am." The tension between us grew thick, and my mouth went dry. "Don't get any ideas, Sarah. I'm in charge." I stood up, my chest tight with rage. "You can't be serious that you think you can just kick me out of my house after everything that's happened with Mom and Dad. This house is as much mine as it is yours. I'm not leaving, and you can't make me leave." "Oh, I can," Mark said in a cold, calculating voice. "I'm giving you time to figure it out. You regret this, Mark." "Whatever," he said, shaking his head, "just get your stuff together. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I left without saying another word as I walked out the door. "Dad, enough," Sarah, Mark snapped, standing up too. "I'm trying to be generous here, but you're pushing it. You're lucky I'm not taking more." I couldn't believe what Mark was doing. He had always been entitled, but this was something else. It was cold calculated, and I had no idea how far he was willing to go, but I wasn't going to just roll over and let him win, so I started making plans. The betrayal, the loss, and the anger that settled in like a heavy stone in my chest made the next few days a blur of emotions. A week later, things took an even uglier turn when Mark showed up at the house with a few movers, acting like he owned the place. He planned to start clearing out the house and packing up everything he wanted, so I gathered as much documentation, evidence, and anything else that might help me hold my ground. I had no idea what I would do next, but I knew I couldn't just sit back and let him push me out. "Mark, what are you doing? You don't get to tell me what to do anymore, Sarah," he said, turning to face me as he stood in the doorway. "This is my house now." I couldn't believe what was happening. It felt like my entire life was falling apart, and I was helpless to stop it. "You think you're going to get away with this?" I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. "You're not in a position to stop," Mark smirked. The argument with Mark felt like it had just begun, but the tension was already unbearable. His arrogant demeanor and the way he was flinging his weight around made me want to scream. I couldn't stand the way he was acting, as though everything Mom and Dad had worked for was for nothing. I felt like I was being suffocated by his entitled attitude. I yelled at him back and forth in the hallway, "Just come in here and do this, you don't even know what you're doing." He rolled his eyes and began grabbing more of my belongings and throwing them in boxes as if they had no purpose. "I don't understand why you're making such a fuss, you should be grateful that I'm even letting you stay here. You don't get to tell me what to do, this house is as much mine as it is." Mark's face hardened, and he took a step toward me, almost as if he was about to physically push me out of the way. I stepped back, not wanting to escalate the situation further, but my heart was pounding, and every word he said felt like a slap to my face. "Yours," I snapped, clenching my fists, the anger boiling inside me beginning to cloud my thoughts. With my heart thumping in my chest, I spun around and made my way to the stairs because I couldn't stand being in the same room as him any longer. I was going to lose control, so I avoided the movers who were still searching the rooms and went up to the second floor. I couldn't believe he was acting like this, as if I had no right to anything my parents had worked for, as if I didn't matter. I needed to get away from taking things that weren't theirs to cool down and just breathe. The door to my parents' room was jarred, and I hesitated for a second because it felt sacred and hadn't been touched since they died, but I was desperate to get away from Mark and needed some solitude, so I pushed it open and entered. The room was exactly like it had been when Mom and Dad were alive, quiet and serene as if nothing had changed. I couldn't stand being surrounded by memories anymore, so I went to the window and stared out at the garden below, trying to collect my thoughts. I had to decide what to do next because I wasn't going to let Mark win. I needed a plan that would give me leverage. Their dresser still had the same framed photos on it, and their bed still had the same comforter. My curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled open the drawer of the nightstand next to Mom's side of the bed after catching a glimpse of something protruding from underneath it. I thought it might be some old documents or perhaps one of Mom's mementos, but instead, I found an envelope sealed with my parents' names written on it in bold, sloppy handwriting. I felt a chill go down my spine. I had never seen this envelope before. I opened it carefully, my fingers shaking, and found a folded piece of paper inside. As I unfolded it, my heart stopped. It was the will, but it wasn't just any will. Mark had never shown me the real one, which he had likely hidden all this time. My parents had left me everything, not just the family heirlooms, not just a few mementos. I felt a strange mixture of relief and rage when I sat down on the bed, stunned, and my heart pounding. I thought there must have been some sort of error, maybe it wasn't the final will, but no, it was signed in D with both of my parents' signatures at the bottom, and it made no mention of Mark. How could Mark have done this to me? How could he have lied to my face like that? He had attempted to force me to leave the house to take for all this time. I believed that I was at his mercy, but in fact, I had been in control all along. However, I couldn't just sit on this knowledge. I needed guidance to ensure that I handled this correctly, so without further delay, I picked up my phone and dialed a lawyer. I had never dealt with anything similar before, so I wasn't sure where to begin. I needed someone who could help. I need legal help. I took a deep breath, my mind racing, and after a few rings, the line connected. "Hello, this is Richard Parks. How can I help you today? My parents passed away a few months ago, and my brother has been handling everything. But I recently discovered a will that changes everything." Richard didn't say anything at first. I told Richard everything, including the will, the fact that it had left the house to me, and how Mark had been acting as though he owned everything. Richard was silent for a while as he processed what I had said. "Sarah, you have a serious situation here. If what you're saying is true, it could change many things, but I need to make sure that it's legitimate, so we can use it to. Mark will probably fight you on this, especially if he's been living there and acting like he's in charge, so you need to be ready." I took a deep breath because I wasn't sure what I should do next. Richard said carefully, "Do you want to handle this peacefully, or are you ready for a legal battle?" My hands shook as I held up the will, "But I'll bring it to you." The anger that had been building up over the past few days was erupting, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could contain it. "I'm not sure what I want, but I need to make sure I'm doing the right thing," I said, my voice shaking. "We'll take it step by step, Sarah, but whatever you decide, you've got the law on your side, and you don't have to worry about anything else." The next morning, I sat in the lawyer's office, gripping the wheel so tightly that my fingers began to cramp. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I realized that this wasn't over as I hung up the phone, rather, it had just begun. The battle for the house was far from over, and I was about to find out just how far Mark would go to keep what he thought was his. "This document is clear as the day your parents left the house to you. Your brother is not mentioned at all." The words weighed heavily on me even though I had already read the will. Richard Parks, my lawyer, read the document with great focus. His office smelled of old books and fresh paper, and the walls were lined with certificates and law books. Finally, Richard exhaled and looked up at Sarah. Richard nodded. Yes, Mark has no rightful claim to the house if this is the most recent version, and from what I can see it is, then he has no case. Hearing it from a legal expert made it feel real to me, so I swallowed. This is in stark contrast to how Mark had been acting ever since our parents passed away, waltzing in like a king returning to his castle and dictating what would happen to my home, treating me like an unwanted. Richard leaned forward, his voice calm but firm, and said, "We need to do this properly. Call him and ask him to come here. I'll be the one to present the will to him, so there's no debate and no accusations of forgery. Once he sees this, we'll see how he reacts." A guest in the exact place where I grew up, I now had proof that the castle was mine, but Mark wasn't going to accept this. I could already picture Mark's face getting red and his voice getting angry when he realized he wasn't in charge, but this had to happen. I took out my phone, my hands barely shaking, and scrolled to Mark's number. I pressed call twice, and then "What do you want?" Mark's voice was impatient, as if I were causing him any inconvenience. I took a deep breath, and now that it was time sensitive, I went to Richard Park's office. There was a pause, and then I said in a steady voice, "Scar, I don't have time for whatever pity party you're throwing, it's about the will." I could almost hear him processing those words, and then, "Fine," he snapped, "I'll be there in 20. I hung up without saying anything more, and Richard gave me a comforting nod. Let's see how he handles the truth. 20 minutes later, Mark barged into the office like he was the owner, his shoulders squared, his expression unwavering, but he wasn't alone. Lisa, his wife, was right behind him, her lips twisted in that smirk she always wore when she felt in control. Lisa crossed her arms, so this had better be significant. I ignored her and turned to Mark, who raised an eyebrow before turning to face Richard, whose smirk faltered slightly as he gestured calmly. Richard slid the will across the desk and said, "I suggest you read this carefully." Mark grabbed the paper up, his eyes skimming over the words at first, then slowing his grip on the document, tightening his face and changing his usual expression. Mark didn't move immediately, assessing the situation and trying to figure out why I had called him there. The smugness vanished as Lisa leaned over his shoulder and frowned. "What's that?" Mark didn't respond, and his jaw was so clenched that I thought his teeth might break. Richard folded his hands on the desk, saying, "Your parents left the house to Sarah, who is the sole legal owner as of right now, so you have no rightful claim to it." Mark slammed the paper onto the desk, saying, "This is bull," cutting off his nose and flaring his nostrils. Lisa grabbed everything and quickly scanned it before her face twisted in shock. "This doesn't make sense, there must be another will where Mark gets the house." I crossed my arms, "And you are welcome to locate it, but this is the legally binding document." Mark was breathing heavily, and his fingers were now balled into fists. Richard remained completely composed, but this wasn't signed and notarized. Mark's eyes snapped to attention as his parents' legal representatives confirmed the same thing. "You think you can just steal this from me?" he said in a low, dangerous voice. "You can certainly try, but I'll warn you, contesting illegally valid will is expensive, time-consuming, and rarely successful." Lisa shook her head angrily. He had acted as though this house was already his, as if I were just a barrier to be removed, but now that he realized that he was the barrier, his voice fell to a growl. "Do you think this is over?" I met his gaze unwaveringly, "But no, Mark. I think it's just getting started." Mark's face was red with fury, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles were. Lisa, who was turning white, was holding his arm and whispering something, either to try to calm him down or, more likely, to plan their next move. However, no matter how much they planned, they couldn't change the fact that the house was mine, and Mark wasn't the type to accept defeat politely. Richard remained unfazed legally, but "If you'd like to spend," Mark glared at me as if I had personally stolen something from him, as if I was the one being unfair. I slowly let out my patience and ran on fumes. "You keep saying that, Mark, but why did you think you were entitled to it?" He scoffed. "Because I'm the family's man. After all, Mom," I shook my head, more disappointed than anything, "and my dad told me that I would take care of things when they were gone because it made sense." "But, Mark, what makes sense is that they left the house to the person who lived there, who took care of them when they were ill and only showed up when it was convenient." Mark laughed bitterly. "Oh come on, you were just their charity case, they didn't want to hurt your feelings." I turned to Richard, and he shook his head, saying that there are no older wills that have any legal standing. This is the most recent one that has been signed, notarized, and properly filed, and your parents were clear in their wishes. Mark's expression darkened, "But they may have written this long before they realized you wouldn't be able to manage a house on your own." The guilt trip was the same tactic they had been using since day one, and I didn't flinch. "Lisa, you have 1 week to pack up and leave." Mark's eyes. "Do you think I manipulated them into leaving me the house, unlike you? I never asked them for anything." Lisa crossed her arms. Well, what are you going to do now? Kick us out, throw out your family? Widened? You can't be serious. I nodded. Oh, I'm grave. I thought that's what families did, supporting one another, so I let you walk all over me. However, you tried to steal from me, humiliate me, and remove me from my own home. I owe you nothing, Lisa scoffed. This is unbelievable. Mark slammed his fists on the desk. You're going to regret this, Richard ever said, folding his hands. Mark and Lisa dragged out the move until the very last day, but I had the law on my side with an official eviction notice and a firm deadline, so they had no choice but to leave. However, they didn't go quietly, even though Mark posted about it on social media. Your words, Mr. Dawson, don't look good in legal disputes. Mark stormed out, Lisa following him, still muttering under her breath. I let out a shaky breath. Lisa constantly made petty remarks about how I had betrayed my family and painted him as the victim, but eventually, it didn't matter since the house was mine as my parents had requested, and as I sat in the silence of the house I had worked so hard to maintain, I felt at last at peace. Tell me what you think in the comments section regarding this entire circumstance.